After the success of Rick Riordan's series of novels about ADHD demigod children who are mad at their absentee parents, Riordan decided to go for seconds by writing a new 5-book series called Heroes of Olympus, where he writes the same type of story, just not as well. I was a teen at the perfect age to finish the Percy Jackson books and be hyped for the then upcoming sequel series, and when it finally came out, I was, let's say, underwhelmed. Our first book, The Lost Hero, dumps us into an inciting incident where demigods Jason, Leo, and Piper are, predictably, attacked by monsters, in this case some storm spirits. Piper thinks amnesiac Jason is her boyfriend, but Hera is just gaslighting Piper into thinking that. The trio are joined by Annabeth, who's on the hunt for a missing Percy Jackson, but since Percy's clearly not here, they all just go to Camp Half-Blood to fill everyone in that monsters are real. It's quickly revealed that Leo is the son of Hephaestus, Piper is the daughter of Aphrodite, and Jason is, somehow, another child of the Big Three, a son of Zeus. Except not quite Zeus, because in Heroes of Olympus the gods can manifest as different versions of themselves, and Jason was conceived when Zeus was in his Roman aspect, Jupiter. So Jason speaks Latin instead of Greek like the other demigods, was trained at a separate Roman demigod camp apart from Camp Half-Blood, and refers to the gods by their Roman names instead of their Greek ones. Our big bad this time around is the Earth Mother Gaia and her children the Giants, who are like mirror antitheses to the Olympians. The heroes shortly go on a quest to free local pain-in-the-butt Hera, who's been captured by a giant, because the gods are hiding on Mount Olympus and nobody else seems like they're going to help. Rick Riordan evidently got tired of identifying every ye-old mythical character he wants to bring back as a monster, so this time he just said whatever, and has Gaia straight up resurrect whoever Riordan wants to be in the story, people like Medea and King Midas, and then have them fight our heroes. Along the way, Piper simps for her fake boyfriend until he decides to be her real boyfriend. Jason meets up with his sister Talia, who thought Hera killed him. Leo repairs a robot dragon for everybody to ride around. And various godly parents make appearances so they can exposition dump to our heroes. Piper's movie star dad was captured along with Hera, so along the way they rescue him too. And they defeat the giant Enceladus, who is siphoning Hera's power to restore himself. Riordan fiddles with the lore of his original story a lot to make the plot of Heroes of Olympus happen, and it doesn't always feel like it works very well. In the original story, it was explained that the gods took on personality quirks of whatever the host nation was for the spirit of the West. So when the gods moved to Rome, they became Roman. But now that they're in America, their interests and personality are shaped by their new host country. But in Heroes of Olympus, it's revealed that the Roman aspects still exist, and they're distinct from the Greek aspects. But both of these are somehow still Americanized. This doesn't really make any sense and makes me wonder how far we can take this. Like, could one of the Olympians manifest and conceive a child in their Spaniard version from when Spain was host for the Spirit of the West? And there's some poor demigod in, like, Montana who has no idea why he speaks fluent Catalan instead of Latin or Greek? Is there another demigod camp devoted to the Spanish-specific demigods like there is for the Roman and Greek ones? Or am I taking this too far? Heroes of Olympus also has severe power creep, because Riordan wants the lesser demigod heroes to have fabulous powers like Percy did, so he gives Leo the ability to control fire, and Piper the ability to literally mind control people, to the point that she can make them swear a binding oath on the river Styx, which is the most magically binding oath in the Riordan verse. I feel like this severely undermines the whole demigod children of the Big Three thing, because kids of the Big Three were always established as being more powerful than demigod children of the less important gods, and the problem will only get worse as the series progresses. The Lost Hero also just flatly ignores Percy's sacrifice from the first series, where he makes the gods swear to recognize all of their children and stop ignoring the minor gods. Riordan turns around and writes a plotline featuring kids who weren't recognized by their parents, and has minor gods like Chione support Gaia, because she doesn't get enough respect from the Olympians or whatever. So like, what was even the point of the first series if it was just immediately going to return to the status quo? But by far the biggest problem with Heroes of Olympus is just that it's not very much fun to read. I don't think the transition from first-person narrative to third-person narrative really serves Heroes of Olympus very well, because when you strip away Percy's running internal commentary and jokes about the situations in which he finds himself, the repetitive monster of the week structure of these books feels really formulaic and dry. In third person, Riordan can tell us that Piper or Leo or Jason are feeling a certain way, but we don't really care about them like we care about Percy, because we're not really seeing things through their eyes in the same way. Third-person narratives absolutely can do good characterization, I just think Riordan is better at writing first-person. Although it's not the dumbest decision the story makes objectively, subjectively the opening of our next book, Son of Neptune, annoys me the most out of all the new retcons in Heroes of Olympus. In Son of Neptune, we find Percy is also amnesiac like Jason was, because Hera was essentially doing a foreign exchange program between the Greek and Roman demigod camps. But Percy has an advantage in that he's invulnerable because of the dip he took in the river Styx during the last Olympian. But Riordan doesn't feel like writing a protagonist who can't be hurt, so he introduces this nonsense plot contrivance that if Percy crosses the river surrounding the Roman demigod camp, the Little Tiber, he loses the curse of Achilles because that's a Greek blessing. And this makes no sense at all. Yes, Achilles himself was Greek, but that doesn't mean the underworld is solely Greek. So why would getting splashed by a Roman river do literally anything to Percy's invulnerability? And if it does something to his invulnerability, why didn't the gods bring a bucket of it to throw at Kronos to erase his version of the curse of Achilles, and make Luke's body no longer fit to host Kronos? If you were going to do this nonsense plot contrivance, you could have at least done it at the actual Tiber River, since the story is already going to Rome later anyway. But the Little Tiber isn't even a real Roman river, we're literally in San Francisco. Alright, enough complaining. Percy makes his way to the new demigod camp, which they call Camp Jupiter, and he meets the rest of the main characters for the series, namely Frank, son of Mars/Ares, and Hazel, daughter of Pluto/Hades. And Percy meets the largely helpful praetor Reyna, and the largely unhelpful conniving augur Octavian. Nico from the first series is also here because he's a secret death guy who does what he wants, so he already knew about Camp Jupiter. Hazel doesn't count as violating the pact of the Big Three, because sort of like Nico, she was born before it was made. But unlike Nico, she's been dead for a while. Camp Jupiter has their own parallels for all the stuff at Camp Half-Blood, but it all gets a Roman twist, like an augur to determine the future instead of an oracle, legionaries instead of campers, and Romany names for all their buildings. Also, the Roman demigods are better at staying alive, so this book introduces legacies, which are demigods descended from demigods, like Octavian, whose grandfather is Apollo. The main problem in this book is that the god Thanatos, who's like an ice agent for the underworld, has been captured by Gaia, so people as well as monsters aren't staying dead when heroes kill them, thus explaining how Hazel is still around. Frank and Hazel join the still amnesiac Percy on a quest to deal with the latest giant problem, which is up in Alaska. Along the way we learn Frank and Hazel's backstory. Frank is a descendant of a lost Chinese Roman legion, and he inherited the power to shapeshift, while Hazel's origin is that she sent herself to the fields of Asphodel to keep her mom from going to the hell part of the underworld, and Hazel can summon cursed treasure from the earth like a human metal detector. Both of these origin stories are way more hardcore than the stuff going on with the new characters in the first book. Piper's backstory is literally just that she likes to steal stuff. On their way to Alaska, Percy and the gang find a harpy called Ella who's been around forever, and who has the Sibylline books of prophecy memorized, so she knows a bunch of spoilers. Percy has a dangerous Princess Bride-style showdown with a guy called Phineas, where one of them drinks poison and one drinks a cure-everything beverage. Gaia has been telling all the heroes that she wants to recruit them or whatever, so Percy makes the gamble that Gaia will help him avoid the poison. And sure enough, Percy drinks the cure, thus restoring his memories, but killing Phineas. Percy calls his mom to let her know he didn't die, but I guess Annabeth can go pound sand or whatever, because I don't think Percy bothers to call her. Anyway, the heroes make it to Alaska and have the big showdown with the latest giant, who can't be killed in the land in which he forms. So Frank just moves him to Canada and then kills him there, and afterwards gets together with Hazel. They free Thanatos, and he helpfully does not take Hazel back to the underworld, which is a plus. Unfortunately, the doors of death are still open, so the problem of death not being permanent is only partly fixed for now. Also, our heroes fought the embodiment of Barley, some Hyperboreans, and ran into the Missandrist Amazons at one point. After the quest is over, everybody goes back to Camp Jupiter to kill another giant, and then to wait for the Greek demigods to show up and get the real main quest started. I think Son of Neptune is probably my favorite of the Heroes of Olympus books, or at least it's the one that I find least bad. Maybe just because I'm so glad to have Percy back, even if we don't get his internal monologue. In Mark of Athena, things finally get cooking as the 7 prophesied heroes who are supposed to beat Gaia are all together in one place, and they all know more or less what they need to do because the last giant they killed spilled Gaia's whole plan, which is to mess with the origins of the Olympians in Greece. Leo built everybody a ye old helicarrier to get them there, since his dragon blew up in the first book, but some evil spirits possess Leo and make him shoot at Camp Jupiter, so most of the Roman demigods hate the Greek ones now. Before going to Greece, everybody needs to go to Rome and kill a few more giants who seem to be dropping like flies, and they need to rescue Nico D'Angelo, who got captured by said giants. Leo encounters the goddess of revenge Nemesis, who roasts him for being the only one without a girlfriend, and Percy has a run-in with Dionysus/Bacchus, who, like most of the gods, seems to be dealing with dissociative identity disorder about the Greek/Roman split. Annabeth, Piper, and Hazel run into Aphrodite, who is an Olympian who doesn't really have a distinct Greek and Roman form, so she's as lucid as she ever is. And as Leo's airship crosses the Mediterranean, Jason argues with fellow son of Zeus Hercules, who's kind of a doomer. Despite the fact that Hercules is immortal, the most well-liked demigod in history, and is married to Hebe, the goddess of youth. The crew also fight Chrysor, the demigod pirate, and Percy offers the pirate's ship as an offering to Dionysus, which is a surprise tool that will help us later. Once everybody gets to Rome, Annabeth begins a side quest to find the titular Mark of Athena, which is a statue of Athena that everybody thinks is really important for some reason. In order to get it, Annabeth has to face her fear of spiders in a big way by outsmarting the original spider Arachne, who was once cursed by Annabeth's mom Athena. That's too many A words in one sentence, but whatever. Everybody who's not Annabeth goes to help rescue Nico, and thanks to Percy's offering, Dionysus comes along to help kill some more giants. Nico fills everybody in that to actually close the doors of death, somebody has to seal them from the inside, meaning you have to actually go to Tartarus. So Percy and Annabeth obligingly have an accidental tumble into the underworld, so they can fight their way out the other side back to the surface, and close the doors of death along the way. The remaining 5 demigods all make their way to Greece, which is coincidentally where Annabeth and Percy are going to pop out once they finish fighting their way through Tartarus. Book 4 opens with Hecate, the goddess of magic and crossroads, telling Hazel that she needs to learn to manipulate the mist, the magical veil between mortal stuff and god stuff. Talia Grace was always really good at this in the first series, but nobody else in these stories seems to have a knack for it. Meanwhile, Percy and Annabeth tumble into Tartarus, where they find all the monsters that Percy has already killed in earlier stories, since Tartarus is where all the monsters form. In one of the spin-off stories I didn't cover, the Demigod Files, Percy teamed up with an amnesiac titan named Iapetus the Piercer, who Percy renamed Bob. In this book, Bob is still on Team Percy, but because Bob is in Tartarus, he starts to remember his old evil self. However, thanks to his time as Bob, he's still cool with helping the demigods. Back on the mortal plane, the gods' split personalities are going into overdrive, completely incapacitating their ability to make decisions as they oscillate between Greek and Roman, matching the state of war between the Greek and Roman demigods, who are preparing to fight it out back at Camp Half-Blood, thanks to the miscommunication from the last book, and because Octavian is stirring up trouble. Inside Frank's mind, Ares and Mars bicker, preventing the war god from being much help, but Frank eventually does enough cool war god stuff to be bestowed with the blessing of Ares/Mars, making him temporarily invulnerable. Hazel also figures out how to control the mist, and Hades/Pluto shows up to congratulate her in person. Leo has a showdown with the winter goddess who's still helping Gaia, and Leo gets blasted to the island of Calypso, just like Percy was. Although Percy's wish at the end of the last series should have freed Calypso, the gods drag their feet so she's still marooned there. But as Leo has naturally fallen in love with Calypso, he swears on the river Styx that he will return and free her. Back in the underworld, Percy, Annabeth, and Bob keep making their way to the doors of death, and they discover that when people make offerings to the gods, the food that is offered pops into Tartarus. Annabeth decides to see if this works both ways, by sending an offering backwards and getting a message to Camp Half-Blood. An offering to the gods should really be absorbed by the gods, so I don't really understand why it all gets dumped into Tartarus, and even less do I understand why it's a two-way means of communication. But I've complained too much to be sidetracked now. Bob introduces Annabeth and Percy to Damocin, the only good giant. Damocin is supposed to be the antithesis of Ares, so he's actually peaceful. But when the spirit of Tartarus itself manifests to stop Percy and Annabeth, Damocin and Bob decide to hold it off, even though that means annihilation, and Percy and Annabeth finally make it through the doors of death. The start of this final book has the heroes meeting a ghost called Antonius, who is held together with the power of Gaia, and that reminded me a lot of a similar character in the Battle of the Labyrinth, the 4th Percy Jackson book. In that book, a guy called Antaeus couldn't be killed while he touched the earth, because his mother was Gaia, but Antaeus' dad was Poseidon. I feel like this sequel series, dedicated to fighting Gaia, might have mentioned how and why Poseidon had a son with his own grandma, but I'm guessing Riordan just hadn't decided to make Gaia the next big bad when he decided to include that particular myth. Along with the main heroes, Blood of Olympus features the B-team, namely Nico, Reyna, and a satyr called Coach Hedge, who transport the statue of Athena to Camp Half-Blood using weird shadow magic that Nico can do. This is supposed to be a peace offering that will cause the Roman and Greek demigods to stop fighting, and thus allow the gods to stop having split personalities. Along the way, they fight Orion, the giant who opposes Apollo and Artemis, and Nico reconciles with Hades, who's nice now in comparison to who he was in the earlier books. Meanwhile, the main 7 demigods go on more adventures as they try to stop the rise of Gaia, like fighting the goddess of victory so they can keep her from supporting the Roman or the Greek demigods in particular. Percy and Jason fight the storm goddess Cymopolea, who's supporting the giants, but Jason convinces her to switch teams by tempting her with merchandising rights and a cabin at Camp Half-Blood. Leo, Hazel, and Frank go to see Apollo and Artemis about some godly help, especially the Physician's Cure, which is basically a resurrection spell. They need this because either Jason or Leo are fated to die fighting Gaia, and the cure will hopefully keep them from staying dead. Apollo doesn't really feel like helping, since Zeus is already mad at Apollo for revealing the great prophecy too soon, but Leo passes a speech check and gets him to help anyway, and Apollo's son Asclepius gives Leo the physician's cure. The giants meanwhile gather at the Parthenon because it makes a better set piece than the old Mount Olympus, on which to raise Gaia. All they need is the blood of one of our 7 demigod heroes, so you would think the simplest thing to do would be just not to go there. But our heroes go anyway, and Percy's nose bleeds, thus waking Gaia. The B team is able to make peace with the Greek and Roman demigods, and the Olympians finally manifest without the conflicting aspects of their personality. Zeus is usually portrayed in these books as wildly unreasonable, but when he explains his side of the story about why he's mad at Apollo and been so touchy about the next great prophecy, it kind of makes sense. He essentially explains that because Apollo and Hera were so gung-ho about their understanding of the prophecy, the Fates were hyped up about Hera's ideas about how it would work. And so they cemented Hera's version of the future out of many possible futures. But if Apollo and Hera hadn't interfered, things could have gone differently. All of which is just sequel baiting for the next series, because I don't think Rick Riordan is ever going to retire. Anyway, everybody goes to Camp Half-Blood for the final showdown, because Gaia is inexplicably showing up there and not somewhere that would actually make any sense. Luckily, Leo fulfills the prophecy by incinerating Gaia's avatar, which scatters her essence, just like the essence of Uranus the sky god was scattered. So the Earth and Sky go back to being just Earth and Sky with no supervillain shenanigans. It looks like Leo is dead, but naturally he found a way to administer himself the physician's cure post-mortem, so he comes back to life. And the book ends with him fulfilling his promise to meet up with Calypso. If there's one thing, besides everything else I already mentioned, that I really miss about the first Olympian series over the second one, it's that the books have lost all sense of mystery and dread about the gods, so the gods are mostly just punchlines. The first book series did this too, but there was also an element that these beings were more than their showboaty facade that they showed mortals, and there was even a sadness to them. I don't get that sense from the second book series. There was also this idea that Riordan used to play with, but he basically dropped for the second series, which is that uttering the name of the gods was itself a big deal. Like in The Lightning Thief, every time Percy says the name of the gods, Zeus makes it thunder, and Dionysus warns Percy that you shouldn't invoke the names of the gods lightly, and that whole idea is never really explored much. I also think that a series with 7 main characters is too many. You can really see Riordan struggling to develop each of these people in interesting ways so that they all have enough time in the limelight. Honestly, I think we'd be better off cutting out a few characters entirely. Like if we dropped Piper, who is completely overpowered, and Jason, who is basically a non-character anyway, there'd be more time for the remaining 5 demigods to be better explored. And Reyna could wear a lot of the hats that Jason does, since we'd still need a Roman demigod representative to make the story work. I would also argue that the villains in this story need someone like Luke from the first series on their team to make their defeat at all interesting. We don't really care about the giants or Gaia, and their defeat doesn't have the same emotional stakes as the defeat of Kronos. And even though Kronos was trying to rule the world and Gaia wanted to destroy it, the presentation of Kronos' takeover of Olympus is so much more chilling and interesting than Gaia's attempts to indiscriminately destroy everyone. The scenes in The Last Olympian where Percy talks to Hestia, or argues with Hermes about Hermes' treatment of Luke, or Megacellan's madness, are all more interesting than anything that happens in Blood of Olympus. The Heroes of Olympus books marked a new normal for Riordan's work, and his books no longer have the heart and sincerity of his earlier novels, and they resist actually changing the status quo at every turn. And I know Riordan can write good books, I just think he lost the ambition to do so after the Percy Jackson series. Having edited the video now, I feel like I came across a lot meaner than I intended to against Riordan, but I really enjoyed the Percy Jackson novels and I just had a lot to say. Thanks for watching.